Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Today, we are talking about some interesting data related to immigration in your school communities. Plus, we've got the superintendent from Lake County on the show today to talk about a recent op-ed that he published on DEI.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it's a couple of minutes after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazweta, ACSA's Executive Director. I'm Naj Alikan, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. Again, we're honored to have you with us today. Go ahead and jump into the chat. Say hello and let us know where you're watching from today. Edgar, how are you?
Good, Naj. We haven't done this in a couple of weeks. I know last week, as a lot of our members and their students were celebrating spring break. I know we were got a little bit time away. I was, doing some college visits with my junior high school daughter who's looking at applications. Congratulations to your daughter. I know she made a big announcement here over the last couple of weeks. I know that's got to be exciting, and it's just a cool part of the year. Just to see on social media, friends and family, just with all of our students, kind of their long journeys, and just seeing that moment of celebration as they make decisions on what the next step in their chapters are in their journey.
Yeah, it was. I'm very proud of my daughter. This is my my second daughter, my youngest. Chose Long Beach State 2 weeks ago, so very excited about that. I was telling her the long tradition of Long Beach State with the baseball team and the basketball team. I think she's more excited about the beach being like 5 minutes away.
Yes, I'm a big fan of Long Beach State. I don't talk too much, but my undergrad is from Cal State Fullerton. I'm a Titan, which are rivals there to the Dirtbags there in the baseball team in Long Beach State. So we'll have another thing to root against you there.
There you go. There'll be another thing for us to root against each other. Neri's first on the chat today. Matt Chamberlain is there as well. So happy to have all of you guys with us back today. A couple of news headlines, and then we will bring in our guest. Brock Falkenberg is the superintendent from Lake County Office of Education. He wrote this incredible op-ed that's been published in a number of places about DEI and the importance of DEI in our communities. We're going to talk with Brock in just a couple of moments. Edgar, I do want to refer to this document. And sorry, I have it highlighted because there was some really good information. This is an ACSA survey of our school leaders, 93 school sites with 85 local education agencies coming in here to talk about the impact of the immigration policies launched by the Trump administration. I want to give you some of this data, and then Edgar, I'll let you reflect on it. 63% of those who participated reported that the federal policy changes on immigration have led to an increase in student absences. 72% of respondents indicated that the climate around immigration enforcement has negatively impacted their students' mental health. And in response, schools have expanded their access to counselors and psychologists and equipped educators with trauma-informed training to increase support to students. Some schools have reported conducting comprehensive staff training covering immigration rights, the collection and protection of sensitive information, and effective strategies for responding during these uncertain times. Two other pieces of data for you. 66% of respondents say parental engagement has been impacted by the immigration enforcement. 54% reported decline in student engagement. I guess, Edgar, the easy thing to say is we expected some of these new policies that have come from our federal government to impact our school communities, impact the students, impact the parents. Now we actually have true data that's making its way over to the state capitol with our policymakers on what that true impact is.
Yeah. Shout out to Yvonne, the GR team, who I know collected some of this data at the request. I know of some of our state policymakers, as all this was, happening. They wanted to put some data or at least some qualitative, maybe quantitative numbers to this in terms of what is, we know the narrative. What is this? How is this looking on the ground, and how is this persisting, right? And so hence we did this little bit of survey. I think it speaks for himself. I think most of the folks here on our show can probably attest to what they've been seeing there at the ground level. I know when I jumped on, you and Brock, our guests, were talking about this. It's also the enforcement. And I think one of the questions was about like the culture of it, right? Like even the perceptions of the fear. And something we've talked a lot about here on this show, that sometimes that fear in itself is causing disruption, whether there's real enforcement or not. I think just this folks looking at, uniformed officers, ununiformed officers, strange cars that might come into a community, things that they perceive not be a threat. It's now another thing that in many cases families and students are focused on, obviously impacting learning in many cases.
Yeah. Two other stories for you. This is from the state capitol earlier today. Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Don Ogden. Don is from the Folsom Cordova Unified School District and a member of ACSA's HR Council. He testified at the Assembly Public Employment and Retirement Committee today in support of Assembly Bill 1233. The bill, authored by Assemblymember Josh Hoover, would create a statewide database of classified positions, employment history. During his testimony, Ogden said, quote, AB 1233 will offer a critical tool to protect students and ensure their safety and well-being is prioritized. And finally, I want to get to this story, Edgar. The Supreme Court is likely to rule for parents in Maryland who've objected on the religious grounds to books made available in a school district's elementary schools that feature stories about gay and transgender characters. Members of the 6-3 conservative majority, according to NBC News, seemed sympathetic during the nearly 3-hour oral arguments towards the parents' claims that the Montgomery County Board of Education violated their religious rights by failing to provide an opt-out for their children. NBC reports that some justices indicated that the board's refusal to provide opt-out might have been motivated by hostility towards religion. At issue, I want to make sure I clarify this. The books were included in the English language arts curriculum in Montgomery County, and this dispute dates back to 2022. A final ruling is due by the end of June, but we want to play this clip. This is from during the oral arguments by Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. She asked a very expansive question and got a very unique answer to that question. Take a listen.
Example one, we have a gay teacher in the classroom and they have a wedding photo on their desk, and the children are exposed then to the same kinds of picture that you say is in the book that you don't want children to be exposed to. Do we have opt-out provisions for children in that situation?
Again, we think the same rules would apply. And if you were in a system...
The same rules would apply. So this is not just about books. This is about exposure to people of different sexual orientations and the objection, the sincerely held objection, that children shouldn't be exposed to this.
All right.
There's a lot there. I mean, I it's funny because when we were talking, we had talked about this case before, and I hadn't dug in. This was actually very timely, even for myself, when you brought up the article today about that the arguments, and not surprising given the political makeup now of the Supreme Court, just where it appears just from the questioning and whatnot, where things may be headed. Now, the one thing that I had always thought is like, what are going to be some of the implications? Books is, one could argue, okay, clear cut. What do you have in there? What do you don't? Obviously, easier said than done. But we've been dealing with this conversation now. What the justice there asked, I think, was along the lines of like, just what are going to be the consequences of this? Should it go in this? Should be the ruling be in this direction for our educators, for our diverse communities? I think it's especially in a state like here, like California. I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot more about this potential decision should things go in that direction.
Yeah, I guess what popped in my head after listening to the justice asked that question is, at what point does the First Amendment get infringed upon if you have a photo on your desk, or somebody puts a pamphlet on your desk or something like that? And who knows what the implications are one to the next. How
That's going to be a big one.
evolve.
That's going to be a big one here in terms of when we get into Supreme Court ruling season. I'm sure we will be talking more about that.
Yeah. Hey, I forgot to mention this, Edgar, and then we're going to bring in our guest. We have new viewers today because we are now broadcasting on LinkedIn as well. So it's Facebook, it's YouTube, it's LinkedIn. So
okay.
Good afternoon to all of our viewers watching today on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you know, and I love that we're expanding it. And I teeter, right? I'm in and out of LinkedIn. I know, like, there's a ton of activity. I know amongst some of our members, that seems like that has become such a cool platform. So yeah, expanding how people can tap in here. No excuse not to be on, right? Now all of these different options.
Exactly. They have no excuse. Let's go ahead and switch to our main topic today and bring in our guest, because there was an incredible DEI article written by our guest that was published, and it's been spread to a wide community because of the importance of the message in it. Brock Falkenberg is the superintendent from the Lake County Office of Education. He is the person who put together this op-ed. It was written as a press release. It's made its way into some of the Lake County publications. Brock joins us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Brock, this is your first appearance, so welcome. This article that was published, beyond responding to this federal memo on civil rights compliance and DEI programs, what was the impetus for putting pen to paper for something like this?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to participate today. But, I think this is a good question as to why did I move this to a press release? Because I didn't start writing this with the intent of putting out a press release. I wrote this initially because I was frustrated. I was frustrated in my own thought process and my own decision-making by a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that every time I made a decision in support of children, would that be perceived as a DEI programming? And would that then be considered a violation of Title VI? Now, I am certainly an individual that follows the law. I intend to follow the law in this particular case, but I couldn't make the law and my own core values jive. So I sat down and started to reflect on my own core values and the core values that I believe every teacher has, which is the core value of supporting each and every child that is in our classroom. I, for one, believe that there is no teacher, no principal, and no superintendent who does not support the concept of every child succeeding. I can only imagine the kindergarten teacher who greets her new students on that very first day of school and the parents that are there with them. Those children are excited to be there. The parents are a little bit nervous and while they have their own level of excitement, they're anxious. And we know that the graduation rate in the state of California hovers around 83%. That kindergarten teacher would never be heard saying, I look forward to supporting 83% of your children today, right? That kindergarten teacher wants and hopes that in 13 years, she can see or he can see every single one of those students walk across the stage graduating from high school. Mm-hmm. So I have a core value. I believe every educator has a very similar core value of supporting children and seeing each and every student thrive. Now, up until I completed breakthrough coaching, I used to have a poster on my wall. For those of you who've done the breakthrough coach, you'd understand that gist of that comment there. But that poster said something to the effect of, every student can succeed, but not in the same way on the same day. And that really speaks toward equity. It talks about, or it speaks toward meeting the needs of every student wherever they are each and every day that they show up. Mm-hmm. And so as I had stated, I was conflicted. I felt like I was compromising my core values each time I questioned this perception of DEI and programming around DEI. So I thought I'd try to sit down and write a little bit about how I could implement my core values in light of a changing framework.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what grew into a press release and really a framework to support a conversation around DEI from a K-12 perspective within the county I serve, and to support teachers in their day-to-day work.
Mm-hmm.
Our teachers, our principals, and our classified staff do the hard work each and every day of meeting the needs of students in their classrooms, regardless of where they are. And as a leader, I believe it is critical for me to back them in their efforts.
Right.
They should not be having to second guess themselves about DEI questions, concerns, and programming because they're doing something unique to support each child.
Right.
Brock,
So,
sorry, go ahead.
As I wrote this, I really did not intend it to be a partisan perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I focused on the economic, democratic, and educational principles that every student upon graduation should be prepared to pursue meaningful employment and participate and contribute to our democratic process.
Yeah.
And therefore, the obligation that we have as educators to help students get there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got to where I am in this conversation.
Mm.
Brock, well, appreciate you being on here. Appreciate your your perspective on this. Oh, and just to mention to our viewers, if you haven't read the article, I know Gianna posted it there in the chat, so we'd encourage everybody to check it out, even while we're talking here. But I think for all the reasons you stated, right, like this has become, unfortunately, one of the toughest conversations that our educators has had to deal with, given some of the political dynamic and given what's even before the November elections, whatnot, even before the new administration. This was something we've been battling with. We've had this conversation many times on this show. We've been having this conversation here as ACSA. And I do appreciate how you framed that up in terms of, yes, we could put labels, but what is it that we're actually talking about here in terms of the focus of the work? So just out of curiosity, you're in an interesting community. Maybe we're going to ask you a little bit question about Lake County in a second, but just, put some context for us in terms of your community. And then what has been the response to kind of your message there?
Well, the response has always been, or everything I've received directly, I should say, has been very, very favorable. I think people particularly appreciated the framing of DEI from that K-12 perspective and really kind of delving into how do we continue to support students and the underlying embedding of DEI within those supports. So while social media had some negative feedback, I'd say 80 to 90% of at least the comments I've read have been supportive. And certainly locally, in terms of interactions I've had with the public, people that have outreached to me on the streets or in the store, has all been supportive. And I appreciate their pulling me aside and just saying thank you for the feedback.
Brock and folks, if you have any questions for Brock, go ahead and put those into the chat. We'll try and tackle some of those at the end of the show. Brock, I want to pull something out of this out of this news release, this written piece that you wrote. DEI is not a slogan or a box to check in Lake County. It is a reflection of our community and a core aspect of our mission to serve every child. Diversity is not optional in Lake County. It is our lived reality. It's a powerful message. Has it forced you to have conversations with people in your community? You said that you've received a lot of positive feedback, but has it forced you, or has it opened up the opportunity for you to have more open conversations in your community about what equity is, what DEI is?
As I wrote that statement, and if you'll entertain me for just a minute here, I think I kind of need to frame where I come from here. And so I enlisted in the Army in the mid-'80s. And spent 21 years serving in the military, either as a reservist or on active duty. And for anyone that has gone through basic training, you are thrown into this environment with individuals from across the country, from remote areas, rural areas, urban areas, suburban areas, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different races. And in order to succeed in basic training, the individual doesn't succeed, the team succeeds, as well as every individual in that team. The squad succeeds and the platoon succeeds. And our drill sergeant, although he might not have framed it in quite the way that I am going to say this, as he witnessed us struggling with our coming together and gelling as a team, reminded us that it doesn't matter what our race is, it doesn't matter what our background is, it doesn't matter what our ethnicity is. When we enlisted, we signed up and we are now all green. And that while we can't control diversity issues within our team, we can control the efforts of the team and therefore the success of the team, the squad, and the platoon. And I don't believe education is a whole lot different than that. We as educators and we as a community cannot afford to have roughly 20% of our adult population on welfare. We cannot afford to have 17% of our students not graduating high school. We need to see success of each and every one of our students. And as so, we need to figure out how we're going to engage them and help them thrive. So while I haven't seen this force a conversation at this point in time, I think it's opened the door to some important conversations or some important opportunities, really, to explain what DEI is from the context of a K-12 realm. And the core value that we all have as educators and as community members, for that matter, to help and see all students grow and thrive. I think people understand and support the concept of that every student deserves a safe and successful educational opportunity. And if we can make that the focus around our conversation, then I think it opens the door to building trust, clarifying our purpose in the work that we're doing to support all students. I'm going to stress that word all, and to reinforce our mission as educators, which is really rooted in service to children and families.
Brock, it's interesting. And I think one of the reasons we were you've been a longtime ACSA member, involved on so many different fronts, a respected voice, amongst your colleagues, the county superintendents, and just, holistically in our education community. And I know, we get folks from all over the state, and, Lake County, I'm sure you would agree, not probably a place that not everybody is an expert on, right? And so we, digging in, getting some context, some interesting trends there. I'd like to kind of get your take on it. You mentioned, the intent was not to make this partisanship, that it really didn't matter. And I love your analogy there about everybody being green at the end of the day there. I think that was well put. Going back to Lake County, one of the things is, it has a reputation, and I think we saw this in the last election cycle, that conservative candidates win a lot of local elections and whatnot. But you look at some of the national picture, it was actually split pretty evenly in the presidential election. And, you've talked to us about the different demographics too, and the different vantage points that the communities are coming for. Tell us a little bit more about Lake County, and just like, how has that community changed, and how does it influence kind of your thinking on this broader issue?
Well, certainly, I think one of the things that you can see from our election results is that we have a wide range of experiences and values and hopes for the future. And, what I see in my role is really bringing this conversation and gelling it around how do we leverage the shared commitment to that next generation, to our children, to our students. I shared with you, I don't believe my article, my press release was partisan. I do not believe the concept of students thriving is a partisan issue. I do not believe that the practice of non-discrimination is a partisan issue. I can tell you two things about my community and my county. and that is that they support children, right? So let's leverage that. The other thing I can tell you is that they do not want to see young adults on welfare or engaged in an illegal economy. So that means as educators, our only recourse is to make sure that we are preparing every student for success. And my job as a leader is really to make sure that we are putting the focus on students and families, ensuring that every child, no matter their background, no matter their race, no matter their ethnicity, have access to the resources that they need to thrive and succeed.
Brock, I want to ask you this final question. You know, in this piece that you wrote, you mentioned that some of the demands and orders coming from the federal government are vague, and I don't think that you'd get much of an argument from other district leaders. How is that impacting your work in being able to support students and running the day-to-day operations of a public school district in your school community?
You know, that's a good question, Naj. And I think really that comes right back to how we started this conversation and the disconnect that I was feeling. I believe the memorandum that was written and sent to LEAs, as well as our state education agency, was really kind of framed around the concept of institutes of higher education and how they function. And while K-12 and institutes of higher education really work hand in hand, we're not the same beast. And I think because it was framed in the concept of higher education, it's unclear as to how we apply some of the same thinking in that K-12 realm. It does mean that we have to spend a great deal of time interpreting what was the intent of this message and what are the outcomes for our schools, for our staff, and for our students. And putting that effort in, putting that planning in, putting that collaboration in, and asking tough questions to make sure that we are following the law and living up to the intent of the law while making sure that we keep students and family needs front and center. So yes, while this does create a layer of complexity, it should not stop us from moving ahead. We should stay focused on our mission, which is to create safe, effective learning environments for all students. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about this from my perspective. And while we will follow the law here in Lake County, we're always going to frame this from the capacity of how are we supporting the next generation of leaders out there, our kids.
Brock Falkenberg, Superintendent, Lake County Office of Education. You can read his press release, op-ed. We put a link to that in our chat session. Brock, it's been an honor having you here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We look forward to having you next time.
Again, I've enjoyed the opportunity, and thank you for the venue to really talk about a key issue, not just here in Lake County, but across the state and across the nation. And ultimately, it is an economic imperative that we continue to strive to meet the needs of everybody.
Yes. Thank you, Brock, for the work you do. Thanks so much for being with us today. Folks, want to let you know of a couple of things we have going on here at ACSA. Want to remind you that our Critically Conscious Classroom, it's our very first exclusive ACSA web series that comes your way tomorrow afternoon. We are broadcasting that on YouTube for the very first time. You can catch that. It begins 2 p.m. Here on the ACSA YouTube site. Also want to remind you guys that coming up next week, we've got our May revision budget preview. John Gray is going to join us. John Gray from School Services of California. The legendary John Gray, Edgar. We're going to hold him to giving us some budget predictions. And then every time he comes on for the next 3 or 4 months, we'll be able to go back and tell him that he was incorrect on at least half of those. But yes, John Gray will be with us next week. And Edgar, you'll get to tell us about your trip to coast next week.
going to DC. I mean, we've been talking so much about Washington, DC. I'm actually setting foot in the district there for the first time, given the change in leadership and whatnot. I know for those that don't know, we're going with the California School Boards Association and a lot of our members from throughout the state to do some joint advocacy. So yeah, I'll be excited to report on how things are in our nation's capital here next week.
Yeah, folks, I had mentioned our new followers, our new viewers over on LinkedIn. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn. And of course, whether you are on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook, please subscribe to us on YouTube. You will get instant alerts when we're about to come on the air with breaking news, and then a reminder about our regular Wednesday show. And folks, if you have great stories happening in your school community, we want to tell those stories. Send your news releases, your talking points, your photos to Michelle Carl, our EdCal editor, mcarl@ACSA.org. Edgar, that does it for us today. Again, John Gray on the show next week. We get to play Where in the World is Edgar Zazwata next week as well. So looking forward to both of those things next week. Folks, thanks so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays here. ACSA Facebook, ACSA YouTube, ACSA LinkedIn. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next week.